Hello everybody, I am beechmen, and welcome back to my channel. I know it's been a while, and I apologize for the difficulties with general upload schedule, but I'm happy to announce that I'm back on with a video that's taken me a lot longer than my normal videos, but that's because it's one applicable to people who work with every single faction. Specifically, this is a video compiling underutilized strategies, tactics, units, and ideas for each and every single faction. One army composition for each. Excluding the Decadent Host because, well, Siggy's in horny jail, to put it simply. I mean, I don't make the rules. Of course, thank you all for tuning in. I don't want to waste your time, so let's get down to it. Now, the beechmen, I think, are a fairly interesting faction when you get down to it. Because they have this kind of idea of bigger, better, faster, stronger, but I find that very few people truly lean into that. And that's what this build is all about. Foregoing traditional monstrous infantry in favor of good old-fashioned blood. Which is odd, because I've opted for slangors instead of corngors. The general strategy here is simple. Use those initial waves of ungors, likely a bit of ungor herd, and then an additional attack by the gore herd. Basically, these guys are mostly fodder. The gore herd are a bit better. While you're doing this, make sure that you're screening out any skirmish units or any kind of mid to early game cavalry, with the poison warhounds, the harpies, and the centaurs to take the brunt of it. So that way you can more easily get what the real killer of this build is in. Centaur butchers and sons of Goros. When these guys are behind the line, there will be nothing that survives, and if you're looking for that AP later in the game, these guys are great, especially with that Guardian, because Kazrak will be rolling deep with a grislgor chariot, and 2 accompanying grislgor chariots. Now, do you want infantry killing? Well, I put infantry killing on my infantry killing. Slap a slangor in there too, for some perfect vigor and maneuverability along the battlefield to support where necessary, and you've got a pretty scary build, albeit very high micro. Also, I do realize I forgot to say, every single army featured will have a bit of leftover gold. I like to give you guys stuff to play around with, and this is all meant as a general blueprint. Britonia. You know what I find perplexing? That nobody seems to bring Grail Guardians and a Life Wizard. Why they do this is beyond me, honestly, but if I can keep all of the beautiful Britonian chevaliers to myself, I won't complain. So, when you think of the fanatical forces of the mighty Britonia coming forward, I rarely find people say Grail Guardians. And honestly, it's hard to see why. In between the 130 armor and 100 melee defense, and their clear synergy with Lore of Life spells, like Awakening of the Wood to stop other enemy cavalry from going around them, Regrowth, and if they're in a really tough engagement, Flesh to Stone to lock them down and make them even tankier, it honestly perplexes me. And bringing 2 of these high-tier cavalry units, while it is risky, is not that big of an issue, for most builds at least. Britonia doesn't suffer from the same issues that other factions can as much when bringing high-tier cavalry builds, because they have a lot of cheap and devout units to try and fill the gaps that you've spent your money on cavalry in. Specifically, They have a lot of simpler damage dealers for cutting through swaths, like battle pilgrims. They have ways to hold the line easier, like grislgors with Icon of Devotion. They have easy access to AP with arbalists, dismounted knights, incredibly skilled mounted yeomanry, and a blessed field trebuchet to control your engagements. Combine that with a Britonian lord with the crown of command and stand your ground, and you have actually a surprisingly durable front line. Of course, it's no dwarf shield wall or staunch line of spears, but you'd be surprised how tanky this army can really get. Combine that with Lore of Life magic to constantly be refreshing your vigor, and your mounted yeoman can countercharge any potentially high-risk ranged units, your blessed field trebuchet knocking anything else out, and you can slowly wear them down with the real clincher, the Grill Guardians. If you guys haven't tried a build like this before, and you're a Britonia fan, I highly encourage you to. It's a lot of fun, and you'll be really surprised by how well the Grill Guardians perform. I think out of all the builds that I've made, this has been the most strange. A Chaos area control build isn't really what you think of when you think of Chaos. Maybe the Decadent Host, but Chaos? Traditional Chaos? What are you on? I'm on Slaanesh, and a whole lot of speed. So, while most people think of Chaos as a more heavily armored infantry choice, I think that you can actually use the infantry as a service to cavalry. Specifically, using a staunchy line of Chaos warriors and a Chaos Lord on the Manticore for constant support with the Pendant of Slaanesh, and you can generally survive most things. If they continue to break through your front line, there are always cultists to become Chaos spawn. But a meh front line isn't enough to secure a build as worthy. What else do you have? Anything that poses a threat to cavalry can be run over by the Gore-Beast Chariot. Forsaken are an easy source of marks. I tend to Mark of Slaanesh them when using a build like this, so that way they can easily get around. But make no mistake, Mark of Tzeentch is also very viable here. Your Marauder Throwing Axe Horsemen are actually really good, just general all-rounder cavalry. Same thing with your Horsemasters. Armored Trolls are great as reinforcers on the front line. And your Swords of Chaos for that map-wide apocalyptic charge. The idea here is to start off with that apocalyptic charge, mark some of your units, and make a clear establishing effort to kill off your enemy's mobility. If you can win the mobility game with this build, you are golden. No one's going to be able to catch your incredibly powerful cavalry, and if they stick in melee too long with some of your infantry, they'll get a mixture of countercharged and forsaken. It's more of a situational build, honestly, and it's one that I can have difficulty recommending to people in all matchups. And while I think most of these builds you should always be approaching with a slight bit of caution, and I encourage you to experiment, this is perhaps more experimental than even I'm used to. But what about Dark Elves, right? A faction that I've shown myself to be very fond of. Well, I think that many of you have probably discerned that my favorite Dark Elf Lord is Crone Hellebron, and you're not wrong. Crone Hellebron is awesome. I adore her, and I find that Dark Elf builds like this are a lot of fun. If any of you have watched the Hellebron is Mean and the Wise Green battle report, you'll immediately recognize my strategy like this. And you'll start to recognize a pattern. Step 1, zone with shielded Dark Riders and Harpies. Step 2, anything that you find, countercharge with the Dark Riders and the Doomfire Warlocks. Step 3, use Hellebron's Poison, Cursed Blade, and her Heroic Killing Blow, especially with other stuff like Witch Brew, to slowly wear down your opponent. All the while, the Blades of the Blood Queen are giving her Guardian. Anything that is trying to get past into the cavalry, or that you just really want to kill, you can use the Brides of Cain for that lovely, lovely Madness of Cain. And of course, you have your dread spears. The ideal process of events when using this build is cav knockout, mobility game winning, then a bit of a more drag-it-out melee fight with continuous cav charges, and finishing it off with kind of a bit of a longer-ish fight. Generally speaking, I find that Dark Elves using slow tying down process of elimination, knock out that unit, knock out this unit, knock out this unit, can actually work better than most people think, especially with Hellebron's Cursed Blade, who can basically help to keep your infantry not dead, or at least kill the enemy infantry as quick as yours is dying. And never forget that Murderous Prowess gives you a huge vigor boost, which is especially going to be necessary when your cav's ready to charge in now that they're in the perfect position, but are all anywhere from winded to very tired. So, I would highly recommend this. It is a lot of fun. Now for some stuff that you probably haven't seen. So, I like to nickname this build Steel and Gunpowder. And the actual tactics for it is a bit more simple. It's not the same process of events that I tend to do. Use your cavalry, specifically your pistoliers and your outrider scouts, to keep away anything elite to get at your backline. Use a mortar to force your engagements. Systematically blow up their stuff with or anything that poses a threat in the infantry department with your steam tank. Anything that poses a larger single entity problem, kill with your archers and your handgunners, all the while using beautiful Balthazar Gilt to constantly armor up your front line. Using everything from glittering robe to final transmutation. Your spell selection can be pretty liberal here. I like to have Searing Doom for a bit of displacement. Gehenna's Golden Hounds if I see some more grouped up stuff that I really want to do damage to. Glittering Robe to bring greatswords up to 160 armor. And Transmutation of Lead to make my super beefed up front line harder to kill because I've basically made everything that you have heavy and cumbersome. And trust me, some of your range stuff might not always perform to what you're expecting to. When you're running this many range units, you should expect that one or two of them isn't going to go well. The mortar is powerful because it's very difficult to counter, and it forces your opponent to do something. If your opponent just sits there and eats mortar shells, it doesn't matter if you only hit a few. You're slowly bombarding your opponent down. And trust me, the mortar will do damage. It's if your opponent immediately rushes you that it'll do less so. But if they have moments where they sit there and they just let it shoot at them, you'll be fine. I don't always recommend bringing Quicksilver with Balthazar. I actually quite like him just on the basic warhorse. But if you feel confident enough that you can support him from the ground, by all means go ahead. I think that mortars are really underutilized, and to be honest, I don't know why. I think that mortar versus great cannons when it comes to the Empire is a bit of personal preference. But I just really like steam tanks and mortars. What can I say? I'm a simple man. Did somebody say Daka? I said Daka. Is the god, said Daka, and Duke said Daka. So, like the orcs themselves, this is, once again, a more simplistic build. But that's a bit more loose on the tactics department. I'm not a greenskins expert. Anything big, AP, and mean, you can send the black orcs or the rusty arrows this way. But here's what you need to know. Your Night Goblin archers have poison, and your orc arrow boys are kind of a slow-firing menace. They will spelunk away at units. They have heavy armor piercing missiles. You won't notice them firing very often, but when they do, it's devastating. That's why the rusty arrows are so important in this build, because if you can keep their armor sundered, you can keep these AP shots still flowing in, and it is brutal. Not to mention, orc arrow boys should be the ones that you throw into flank combat without really worrying about them. It may not seem like it, but 120 models, 15,000 HP, and a whopping 80 armor mean that these guys don't actually go down all that easy. Savage orcs are just a nice blender for any horde stuff that you might be worried about. The Goblin Great Shaman, I just kind of have him kitted out with all of his spells here. I think the one really necessary one to have is Gork'll Fix-It, to try and keep your range stuff on the line. And the Doomdiver Catapult is there to force an engagement. I would be lying if I said that I hadn't tried something like this before, and it was enjoyable. Have you ever thought, man, I'm fighting dwarves as high elves. They have so much armor. White lions of Crace, war lions of Crace, lion chariots of Crace. Basically, full-on Cracian revolution. Just look at this stat line. And look, they have loyal. I have the Prince on the Griffin just because I think the Griffin is an underrated unit. That will kind of be the theme with some of my lords. You don't have to follow everything that I do to a T. The general gist of this build is as follows. March forward with the White Lions of Crace and the Warriors. This is for any tough armored build to crack, like Chaos or Dwarves for instance. Make sure that your Prince will be flying alongside the Puremain Company for that Guardian. They can also stay loyal with that Unbreakable. Use your Illyrian Reavers as sort of cheap zoning units, and then try and countercharge them with the War Lions of Crace or Rahagra's Pride. If you're facing against a heavy cav faction, this is more of a distraction than anything else, but it certainly helps, especially when you're firing in with Shielded Lothern Seaguard. Against a faction like Dwarves, the issue of missiles can always be difficult, but Shielded Lothern Seaguard can trade very effectively into basically every ranged unit in the game, hitting them with powerful bows and arrows with 85 missile strength. Just, look at it. It's amazing. And silver shields with 80 armor, while the lion chariots of Crace will butcher through any kind of infantry. They're mostly here for the thematics of it, but don't underestimate using the White Lions for killing single entities either. I think this has to be one of my favorite builds. I realized I forgot to do dwarves. I will do dwarves after this. This is my second favorite build that we created, and it was all but handcrafted by the Duke himself. Step 1. The core. Use a light slon. Specifically, mixtures of Foz Protection, Barona's Time Warp, and the Bubble of Nope. Once that is all complete, alongside the Legion of Chakwa, you have a near uncrackable nut of lizardmen. Step 2. Poison. Skink skirmishers. Use them to slowly spelunk away at cavalry and lure them into an unfavorable engagement. Step 3. Countercharge, countercharge, countercharge. Use a mixture of the Cold One Spear Riders and the 100 speed horned ones to try and eliminate the cavalry as quick as possible. Anything else you should probably use the Colossedon Hunters for. Next step. Now, the enemy will tend to start attempting to surround your infantry. Kind of try and form a defensive ring around the Slon, and as they blob up, bomb the ever-living crap out of them with Pterodon Riders and Powhawk Sentinels. Final step, once you've freed up the flanks, charge to your heart's content and butcher the enemy army as they're crashing upon the rock that is your core. I think that people forget that 100 speed horned ones are such a game changer for lizardmen. In between an air force that'll basically force a dragon to try and land somewhere, with the Pterodon Riders and the Colossedon Hunters, enough outward mobility to make most cavalry factions blush, easy access to poison, vigor recharging spells, AoE damage reduction, and high amounts of missile resistance. I hate to say it, but this build is nasty to another level. And it's one of my favorites to play. But it isn't my favorite to play. Now, I've given dwarves a lot of crap. I've given dwarf players a lot of crap. But understand that it's all in good fun, because I do love these stunted little guys, and I think that people who stick with dwarves are, honestly, generally, pretty nice people. So, what happens when you take a faction that everyone thinks is slow and make a mobility build? You surprise them. I'm not sure where people carried over the stigma that End Times dwarves had to camp. End Times dwarves are incredibly good aggressive. The way that I've described them most often is an unmovable, unstoppable, consistently charging wall of steel. They will keep pushing. They may not be the quickest, but they'll keep on going. Now, this is one of the higher micro builds. What you need to do is first use the Gilded to kind of zone out on the flanks. Move forward with Blasting Miners and Dwarf Warriors. Use the Blasting Miners to clear out any kind of chaff that you can see first, and then retreat behind the Dwarf Warriors. You're going to need these guys for a source of AP later. Keep the Slayers nearby too. They'll chop up anything that the Blasting Miners miss. Keep the Storm Wardens as close to the Rangers as possible. Once you've zoned out everything with the Gilded, make sure that you can use the Brimstone Gyrocopter, Storm Wardens, and Rangers to pick it off. Flank around the infantry with the Gyrocopter, start to fire in. Continue to buff up your line with Stand Your Ground and Foe Seeker. Then use Quarrel or Axeman. These guys should generally be out on your flanks as well, supporting any cavalry that you still need to mop up. Then, once you're pretty secure on the flanks, or at least secure enough where you can move in your Rangers. Start firing into the back of the enemy line. Anything that's still left, any single entities, anything that generally looks like it could use a crossbow bolt to the chest, make it have a crossbow bolt into the chest. Now, if all of that sounds like a complex process that will take a lot of effort to pull off, congratulations, you actually heard what I was saying. And I applaud you for that. It means you're still listening into this video. Hi, by the way. But also, it's so fun. You must understand. Nothing makes an opponent go, wait, what? When the dwarves charge them and outmaneuver them. They're in fact very natural sprinters. Very dangerous over short distances. That was not a Gimli accent at all. I'm so sorry. I just give you guys okay End Times content. Now we're moving on to more of the latter half. Norskar, the true children of the dark gods. Now, I see a lot of Norscan infantry builds, but I don't see Norscan infantry builds combined with chariots and cav to make a marauder build. Of course, if you're gonna do this, you gotta bring Wulfric. Like, come on, you can't not bring Wulfric. He's got like Bloodraven and stuff, the Sword of Torgold. He's got a bloody Sea Fang as a wind spell. Like, it's so good. It's so good. This is amazing. Look at that. Now, obviously, Wulfric is great. Marauders are great. But you know what else is great? Bondsmen with Shield Wall. Yeah, good luck getting through that. Reavers with Marks. Anything big that you see? Boom! Whalers. Move them out to the cav engagements too. Any infantry that poses a problem. Ice Wolf Chariot and Giver of Glory from the War Shrine Mammoth. Continue to attack things with Marauder Horse-throwing Axemen, and try and outmaneuver any enemy cavalry with the Wildkin. This is one of those builds that doesn't have super good of a track record when it comes to dealing with cavalry, at least when dealing with it on the flanks. But luckily, considering you have so much shield wall and whalers, you don't really care if your cavalry does end up losing. Of course, it's nice to get Wildkin into the back line, and I do recommend that you hide at least one unit of Wildkin to try and outmaneuver. But you always have Ice Wolf chariots. The hunter has come. We fought monsters. And then we just stayed as people. Because honestly, this is a pretty human force. I mean, like, we got some not human things in here, but like, this is like 90% humans. We got wolves. Alright, moving on. This build. I affectionately refer to this build as the Geneva Suggestion. Because there's been no World War I in Warhammer yet. And after you use this build, there will definitely be a report on you for how many war crimes you've committed. The lovely, lovely rats of the Under Empire are my favorite faction. And the amount of times I see people skipping out on the poison side of them is insanity. First, you have your front line. Basically, storm vermin with halberds and a single clan rat with shields. These are more of the hold the line such. Use rat ogres and mutant rat ogres kind of as flank patrol. Use night runners and gutter runners for that as well. But here's a small trick. While the clan rats are your flanking for interception, at the beginning of the game, use your gutter runners and night runners all throughout your army. Select them all and press your smoke bomb ability. It's an AoE effect and it'll cloak your entire army functionally. It's a really awesome trick, and if you're worried about artillery sniping stuff out before it can get into range, this will easily allow you to sneak up on your opponent. Well, it's not so much sneak up as say, haha, now you can't see me, and then run up. Heavily armored infantry? Congratulations, Deathglow Bombardiers. These guys will shred through it like butter. Poison Wind Globadiers deal with any single entities. Poison Wind Mortars force an engagement. Giant Rats are great spacing units. Mutant Rat Ogres and regular Rat Ogres can kill off cavalry. And your lord, the Master Assassin! Well, he's got the Rival Hide Talisman, Looming Dread to reduce the missile resistance of any large single entity lords you're about to light up with Globadiers. And generally, he's just a very underutilized lord. Running him alongside the flanks with your slowing nets and night runners and gutter runners is a lot of fun. And what you generally see people do is slowly kite cavalry around poison yet, only to countercharge it with giant rats and mutant rat ogres. On from the war crimes, we have the colonizers with skaggy. So, this is less of an underrated build and more of a skaggy gestion. Excuse me. Now, I see quite a few people consistently bring things like Coleman, as well as stuff like the Stegodon or the Salamanders. You see a lot of Warm Bloods, a lot of Whalers, some Hurl Bloods, Spears of the Spine, they're all great. And I'm not saying that this stuff isn't bad, but it's not all that skaggy has to offer. This I call Welcome to the Jungle. And trust me, welcome to the jungle. Now, you can use your Cull Riders and Calor Horsemen as instant shock cavalry. It's basically trying to not give your opponent any room to breathe as you advance forward with your Hofkarls, Lust Erikson, and an Empire Captain. This entire fortification, and between your Hofkarl summon, your Empire Captain Stand Firm ability, your Hofkarl's 85 missile defense, strong vigor, and shield wall, and your Cull Wagon's ability to trade with any missile units that are trying to snipe at it. It's a surprisingly tanky force for really not being that many units or bodies. Anything else you want to space out with pterodons? Trust me, 70 melee attack, 48 weapon strength, they're no joke. And the real clencher. Now, you may have noticed that I strayed away from single entity killing so far, and obviously cutting things like Hurl Bloods and Warm Bloods and your Pathfinders and your Spears of the Spine leaves you super vulnerable to getting killed by monsters, right? Well, the apex predator of Lustria is here. Get that Dreadsaurian out of here, he's too clunky. And brace your inner shield wall speed combo and rush stuff down with Carnosaurs. Honestly, this is more Lizardmen Dinosaur Rush than I normally do with actual Lizardmen, or that I see people do with actual Lizardmen. And it's a really fun strat to play. Boom Kings! I'm a simple man. I just want to rule the world. And Cetra does too. For how iconic the Master Charioteer is, it's shocking how little you see people bring chariot cores as Tomb Kings. Now, once again, this is where I put up the disclaimer. Do not try this build against every single faction. It's good against factions like Skaven, but then also struggles against certain factions like Empire. If you're fighting Lizardmen and they bring a skink core to try and counter you with strong vigor, you'll use your chariots to run them over. But if they bring Temple Guard, you're the square root of screwed. This is one of the more high-risk, high-reward builds, using your Tomb Guard and basically static front line reinforced with Ushabti to try and hold out while you flank around with Cetra and the Chariot Squad. Unfortunately, Nahakaran Horsemen aren't exactly the best flank patrollers, and if your enemy brings some AP cavalry, you're gonna have some issues, which is generally where the Ushabti and the Bowmen come in. But make no mistake, this is a pretty all-in gamble. The only time where I think this is even close to being something that you would pull off multiple times is against Skaven. And that's only because Skaven hate chariots and undead. The Vampire Coast are an interesting one, right? I mean, seriously. Everyone was sitting around speculating about Araby, or maybe even like Chaos Dwarves or something. But they missed the true king of the seas. The Vampire Coast is riding out in style, and this build comes to you from the courtesy of Pajad after lighting me up with a firing line from the sky. Pajad, you're a really nice guy and very fun to play with, but man, you give me great ideas for videos. Anyways, so you've probably noticed that this build is basically the They Fly Now meme. And I find that deck droppers seem to go very unnoticed, sometimes even by your opponent, which is a mistake that I made and will hopefully never make again. Your deck droppers are amazing at sniping out single entities, wizards, people with magic, armored sort of units, constructs, cavalry, just generally clearing out and displacing infantry in the frontline engagement. Seriously, these guys are incredibly good, and if your opponent brings anything kind of from the air to try and take them on directly, you can always support them with your lines of handgunners. Use your halberdiers and deckhands as mostly a meat shield force. Your sirens are going to move in once you've eliminated all of the magic attacks using your handy-dandy deck droppers. Anything that's trying to get around the flanks, you can net with Aranessa Salt Spite, and you can light on fire with the Gallows Giant. Of course, the most famous Vampire Coast combo is Aranessa Salt Spite net plus Vangeist's Revenge. Not to mention, you always have a crab summon. This build has infantry killing, terror, ethereal units, an air force, gunpowder, and nets. And you know what? I think that there's no better build that summarizes the weirdness of the Vampire Coast, quite like zombie pirates flying into battle, shooting people from the air, being carried around by giant bats. You know, there's a person on our Discord server. I highly recommend you join our Discord server, by the way. He goes by the name of Fatal Cowboy. And Fatal Cowboy plays Age of Sigmar. And in Age of Sigmar, he plays an army called grislgor, which, for people who only know Warhammer Fantasy, or maybe even don't really know Warhammer Fantasy all that well, is the Strigoi ghouls, flesh eaters. Now, give that someone access to vampire counts, and they make this abomination. And then I copy it, and I give it to you for everyone to play around with this abomination. Now, when vampire counts are mostly trying to stall people out and win on cavalry, an aggressive infantry corps seems a bit strange, but it's not as far-fetched as you might think. In between the incredibly tanky grave guardsmen, the newly introduced skeletal horsemen that are just good at stalling out for time, basically, until the cavalry eventually breaks through. Cryptors, fantastic cavalry killers, great source of magic attacks, poison, and AP. You know who's also a good source of poison and AP? All of these. You want an air force? We got an air force. Devils of Schwarzhofen and the Vargeists. Anything flying and anything big and expensive these guys are gonna land on. Okay, well, that's all well and good, but isn't this build glass cannon? Yes, that's the point! Shut up! Strigoi Ghoul King. You know what? Give him a friggin' Strigoi summon. This is a fantastic idea. You know what? You want more glass cannon? Up your enemy's melee attack for lowering their melee defense and their leadership. Combining that with rear charges and massive ghouls, constant terror and fear. Please, use the Balefire Corpse card. Please, guys, use it more. It's so good. It's so friggin' good. Vampire counts rush armies that tend to forego cav in exchange for monstrous infantry and regular infantry. Honestly, it's not as crazy as it might initially sound. And while you're definitely giving up a lot of valuable units to try and do something like this, the payoff can be incredibly worth it. If you're fighting a faction like dwarves, who doesn't have a lot of sort of threatening cavalry that you might initially be worried about, specifically heavy cavalry, but does have stuff like rangers that you might be concerned about, well, you have Vargeists, don't you? And now you can poison, AP, and regenerate straight through dwarvish front lines. You'll thank me later. And now we come to the end of the video. I thank you all for watching. But, of course, we have one more faction. The Lorax doesn't speak for the trees. Draika does. So, have you ever paused for a moment after the Wood Elf rework and played them? Like the End Times Wood Elf rework, the one that happened, honestly, not that long ago. Well, I did. And then I played them some more. Then I finished a Sisters of Twilight campaign. Then I decided, you know what, I'm gonna start recording fun Wood Elf builds I have while I'm working on my video. I came up with this abomination. I call it the Lorax. Why? Because... Sorry, I call it the anti-Lorax. Because I don't speak for the trees, I am the trees. Trees with bracing, as well as generally strong vigor. Yeah. Draika with Dryad summons, Frostbite Dryads, Swift Shiver Shards to clear out hordes of swarm infantry, Hagbane Glade Guard, Sisters of the Thorn, Shielded Glade Lancers, and Eternal Guard? This sounds promising, you might be saying. What about the AP? Well, glad you asked. 4 spirits, 50 armor piercing damage. You know who else has AP? I mean, like, this is the Thorn kind of have it. I mean, honestly, like, this is a good transition as any. The main weakness of this build is mass amounts of armor. It can have difficulty cutting through things like Longbeards, Chosen. But what it does have in mass is poison to try and wear them down over time. If you're facing a faction like Skaven, nothing quite gets the job done better than frenzied attacking Dryads, Swift Shiver Shards to just obliterate everything they come near, mass amounts of poison and light cav, and of course the trees. So, remember everybody, keep smiling. I'll probably have a video for you guys starting up soon, as this Saturday that you're seeing this video, I will be playing in an End Times competitive tournament organized by the Duke. As always, if you haven't seen the End Times and this video made you interested in it, check it out. There will be a link in the description below for the mod link itself. I would highly encourage you guys to join the Discord server as well. Thank you all so much for the ongoing support. I will try and take less long with the next video. Thank you. Bye.